The ring arrived on a Thursday. Not a real ring, a placeholder, the kind you pick up at a jewelry counter when you're trying to make something fake look real. A thin gold band in a small velvet box, left on my desk at the hospital with a post-it note that said, "Wear this. It'll make things easier. No signature. Just my brother's handwriting, which I recognize the way you recognize a scar. Not fondly, but immediately. His name was Kevin. My brother, 34 years old, somehow still capable of turning my life upside down from 3 states away. I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift when the box appeared. One of the nurses, Teresa, had left it there without us asking questions because Kevin had apparently called ahead and told her it was a birthday gift. My birthday was in February. It was October. I didn't call him back right away. I finished my shift, changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, and then I called. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. "Before you say anything," he said. "Kevin, just let me explain. Kevin, whose ring is this?" There was a pause. Not the kind where someone is thinking, the kind where someone has already thought everything through and is just deciding how to start. "His name is Holt," he said. "Whitfield Holt. He goes by Whit." I had heard the name. Everyone in Cincinnati had heard the name. The Holts were old money, not old like colonial portraits in the hallway, but old like 3 generations of real estate and construction contracts, and the kind of quiet influence that doesn't need to announce itself. Whitfield Holt specifically was the current head of Holt Development Group, a company that had built half the west side of the city and owned the other half. "Why," I said slowly, "does a man named Whitfield Holt want me to wear a ring?" Kevin exhaled. "Because I owe him money." The number he told me was not small. I won't say it out loud because even now, it makes my chest do something uncomfortable. What I will say is that Kevin had spent the better part of 2 years borrowing against a business that was never going to be profitable, taking advances on deals that never closed, and at some point he had borrowed from Whitholt directly, not from the company, but from the man himself, as a personal favor between what Kevin had apparently convinced himself were friends. They were not friends. "He's not going to hurt me," Kevin said quickly, as if he could read my silence. "He doesn't operate like that. He called in the loan, the whole thing. Due in 30 days. And you don't have it." "I don't have a tenth of it." I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. The parking garage smelled like exhaust and concrete, and the particular bleakness of bad news received in small spaces. "So what does the ring have to do with anything?" Kevin's voice shifted. Careful, practiced, the voice he used when he was about to say something he knew I wasn't going to like. "Whit's company is in the middle of a federal contract bid. A big one. Infrastructure project, government oversight, the whole thing. They've been scrutinizing everything about him. His finances, his partnerships, his personal life. Apparently there was something in his background check that flagged. I don't know exactly. Something about a prior relationship. Something that looks bad. And his PR team thinks that having a stable, serious relationship on record would help smooth it over. Kevin, he needs someone to appear with him at a few events. 4, maybe 5. Official things. A dinner, a charity gala, maybe one more. Just public appearances. Nothing else, Kevin, you're describing? I know what it sounds like. You're describing selling me." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. "I'm describing a business arrangement," he said finally. "One that benefits both of us. The debt gets restructured. You help him with appearances for 6 weeks. And then it's done." "Does he know you called it that? A business arrangement?" It was his idea. I almost laughed. I didn't, because nothing about it was funny, but I felt the urge rise and fall in my chest like a wave hitting concrete. "Give me his number," I said. "We met at his office downtown on a Wednesday afternoon, when I had the day off and absolutely nothing better to do than walk into a glass tower and negotiate terms with a stranger who had apparently decided my brother's debt was worth solving in the most Byzantine way possible. The building was the kind that doesn't have a visible seam between the elevator and the floor when the doors open. Everything was stone and muted light, and people who walked fast and didn't make eye contact. His assistant, a composed woman named Margaret, who looked like she had never experienced a moment of self-doubt, brought me to a conference room and offered me water without asking if I wanted it. I waited 8 minutes. I counted. When he came in, he didn't apologize for being late. He set a folder on the table, sat down across from me, and looked at me the way people look at something they're trying to assess, without appearing to assess it. He was taller than I expected. Broader. The kind of man whose physicality registers before anything else. Not threatening exactly, but substantial, like something you'd need to account for in a room. He had dark hair, slightly too long for the suit he was wearing, and eyes that were a particular shade of gray-green that I clocked, and then immediately told myself to stop clocking. "Dr. Ashby," he said. "Mr. Holt, you can call me Whit. I'm comfortable with Mr. Holt for now." Something moved across his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, something smaller than both. He opened the folder. "Kevin told you the basics. Kevin told me his version of the basics. I'm here to hear yours." He looked up from the folder. "The contract bid is real. The scrutiny is real. My PR team believes a visible, stable personal relationship would help my public profile during the review period. 6 weeks, 4 or 5 public engagements. The debt gets restructured into a payment plan Kevin can actually manage." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything beyond appearances. You'd have your own space, your own schedule, complete control over how you present yourself. I would introduce you as someone I've been seeing privately. You wouldn't have to say much. I'm a doctor," I said, "at Cincinnati Children's. If this goes sideways, if it looks like what it is, my reputation is attached to it. It won't go sideways." That's a very confident thing to say about a plan that involves deceiving federal contractors. The personal relationship disclosure is voluntary. It's not part of the formal bid. It's a perception management decision. He said it evenly, like he'd rehearsed the distinction. "I'm not asking you to lie to the government. You're asking me to lie to everyone else." He didn't answer that, which I took to mean he agreed, but saw no reason to confirm it. I looked at the folder. At the numbers on the first page, Kevin's debt laid out in neat columns, months of bad decisions reduced to a table. "One condition," I said. He waited. "I'm not quitting my shifts. I work a hospital schedule, nights, weekends, whatever comes. You work around me, not the other way around." Agreed. "And if at any point this starts affecting my professional life, we stop. Immediately. No negotiation, no extension." He nodded. Agreed. I looked at him for a moment. "Why this way? You could have just taken Kevin to court." He held my gaze. Something passed behind his eyes. Not quite calculation, not quite something else. And then he glanced down at the folder. "Because court takes time," he said. And this was faster. It was a reasonable answer. It was also, I would later understand, not the whole one. The first event was a dinner at the Westin, a private fundraiser for a children's literacy nonprofit, 40 guests, formal dress. His assistant sent me the details in a calendar invite with a color code and everything. I wore a navy dress I'd bought for my residency graduation and never worn since. It still fit, which felt like the only thing going right. He was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, talking to someone in a dark suit. He saw me walk in. I watched him see me, because there was a moment brief and unremarkable to anyone else in the room, where he stopped mid-sentence. Not rudely, just stopped. Then he said something to the man, excused himself, and walked toward me. "You look," he started. "Ready," I said. The corner of his mouth lifted. I was going to say good, I know, ready is more useful. He laughed, which surprised me. It was a real laugh, not a social one. Quick and a little caught off guard, like I'd said something he hadn't expected from a woman in a navy dress in a hotel lobby. We went in. I had expected it to feel like performing, like watching myself from a slight distance, going through motions that didn't belong to me. And it did at first. The introductions, the handshakes, the careful way I laughed at things that were mildly funny and deflected the questions about how we'd met. Mutual friends was vague enough to be unverifiable and specific enough to sound plausible. He'd suggested it. It was a good suggestion. But then dinner actually started, and I ended up seated next to a retired school principal from Norwood who had opinions about phonics instruction that were genuinely fascinating. And Whit was across the table, and at some point I looked up from a conversation about early literacy intervention and found him watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Not the assessment from the conference room. Something else. In the car afterward, his driver took us back toward my apartment first. We sat on opposite sides of the back seat. "The woman you were talking to," he said. "At dinner, Eleanor Marsh, former principal. She ran a reading program out of her house for 15 years after she retired. You looked like you were actually interested. I was actually interested. He was quiet for a moment. Most people at those things aren't. Most people at those things have been to 40 of them. I looked out the window. That was my first one. He didn't say anything. But when I glanced over, that expression was there again, the one I couldn't read, and this time he didn't look away when I caught him. The second event was a Holt Development Group donor reception. More business, fewer phonics conversations. I wore a dark red dress Teresa helped me find on 2 days' notice, and Whit introduced me to people with the easy confidence of a man who was used to doing things that required nerve. He called me Wren. I don't know when it started. Sometime in the middle of the third event, a gala at the art museum. Someone called my name from across the room, and he turned before I did, and afterward he said, "You actually go by Renata? That's my name." "I know. I'm just." He paused. "It's formal, so is Whitfield. Everyone calls me Whit, everyone calls me Dr. Ashby." He smiled at that. "I'll call you Wren, you can try." He did. And the thing about it, the thing that I didn't examine too closely at the time, was that it didn't feel like a liberty. It felt like something he'd been calling me in his head for a while, and had finally said out loud. I didn't ask about that. There were a lot of things I wasn't asking about. It was after the fourth event that Kevin called me. We were 5 weeks in. One more public appearance left, a charity gala on a Saturday night, and then the arrangement would be over. The contract bid had moved forward. The restructured payment plan was in place. Everything was proceeding according to terms. "How are you doing?" Kevin asked. "I'm fine. Are you, though?" "Because you've seemed—" "I'm fine, Kevin." A pause. Whit called me. I stopped walking. I was on my way to my car after a night shift, keys in hand, 4:30 in the morning. He called to tell me the restructuring was processing. But then he said something else. Kevin hesitated. He said, "And I'm just repeating this. I'm not editorializing," he said. "She's been very gracious about this whole thing. More than she needed to be." I didn't say anything. That's not the way someone talks about a transaction. Wren, don't. I'm just, Kevin, you're not allowed to have opinions about this. You were the one who set it up. I know, and I'm sorry. I know you've never fully forgiven me for that, and you don't have to. But I'm telling you what the man said to me. He was quiet for a moment. Has he done anything? Said anything? Nothing outside the terms. That's not what I asked. I looked out across the empty parking garage, the same one. Same exhaust smell. He's been. I stopped. Tried again. He asks about my patients, not in a personal way, not in a violating HIPAA way, just he remembers things I mention. And he argues with me about things. Args? We disagree about a lot. Not in a hostile way. He doesn't just agree with what I say to keep the peace. He pushes back, and then he listens when I push back. I pause. That's not what I expected. Kevin was quiet. It doesn't matter, I said. One more event and we're done. Wren. Good night, Kevin. I wore black to the final gala because I always wore black when I didn't want to think about what I was wearing. The event was at the Cincinnati Art Museum again. Different exhibition opening this time. Slightly larger crowd. Same complicated hors d'oeuvre that nobody actually wanted to eat. Whit was already there when I arrived. He was talking to someone near the entrance, and when he turned and saw me across the room, something happened on his face before he could arrange it. He had been doing that more lately. Things crossing his face before he caught them. He came across the room and did not tell me I looked good, which was how I knew something was different. He usually said it, not in a performative way, not like a line, but like an observation he made and felt obligated to state. This time he just looked at me for a moment and said, "Can we talk after?" "Not here." "Okay," I said. We got through the gala. He introduced me to people. I talked to a sculptor from Portland about negative space, and a pediatric cardiologist from Cleveland Clinic who knew 3 of my colleagues. At some point, Whit's hand moved to the small of my back, just for a moment, just while someone was taking a photograph, and it stayed there a beat longer than was technically necessary, and I didn't move away. We left at 9:45. His car was waiting, same driver, same route. But instead of giving my address first, he said, "Can we drive for a little?" "Sure." We drove north along the river. The city lights did what city lights do, at night on water, scattered and multiplied into something that looks more beautiful than it has any right to. I watched it through the window and waited. I owe you an explanation, he said finally. For what? For why I did this the way I did. I turned to look at him. He was facing forward, not quite looking at me. The contract pressure was real, he said. Everything I told you in that meeting was true. But Kevin's debt, I could have restructured it any number of ways. I have lawyers for that. I didn't need to involve you. I kept my voice even. Then why did you? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. I've known who you are for about 2 years, he said. The car moved through a yellow light. The river glittered. Kevin mentioned you once, early on. Showed me a picture on his phone. You at some hospital fundraiser, laughing at something outside the frame. He said, "That's my sister, she's a doctor, she's annoyingly more put together than me. And I..." He stopped. Tried again. I thought about that picture for longer than made sense. I didn't say anything. I looked you up. Not in a, I wasn't tracking you or anything like that. I just read your name in a program here, saw you at a conference event there. Never talked to you. Never had a reason to. He finally turned to look at me. When the contract situation came up, and my team said they wanted to put a relationship on record, Kevin's name came up in a different meeting for a different reason. And I made a choice. You used your leverage over my brother to get an introduction. Yes. The word landed plain and without decoration. I'm not going to tell you it was the right thing to do, he said. It wasn't. You had no reason to say yes except to help Kevin, and I knew that. He held my gaze. But I want you to know it wasn't. It was never just a transaction. From my side, it was never only that. I looked at him for a long moment. The cities slid past the windows. The photograph, I said. What was I laughing at? He blinked. What? The photo on Kevin's phone. What was I laughing at? Could you tell? He thought about it. There was a dog in the background. A golden retriever that had gotten into the hors d'oeuvres table. I had no memory of that specific moment, but it sounded exactly like something that would have happened. That dog's name was Biscuit. He belonged to the hospital auxiliary president. He knocked over an entire tray of shrimp cocktail. Whit laughed. Again that real laugh, quick and unguarded, the one I'd stopped being surprised by somewhere around week 3. For the record, I said, you should have just asked Kevin to introduce us. You're right. Instead you orchestrated an elaborate debt collection scenario. I'm aware. That's a lot of effort for a woman who might have said no. He looked at me steadily. I know. I let that sit for a moment. What happens now? The contract bid goes forward. Kevin's payments are on schedule. We've completed all 4 events. 5. Tonight was 5-5, I corrected myself. So the terms are met. The terms are met, he agreed. He didn't say anything else. The driver had looped back south without being told, and my building was coming up on the right. I recognized the turn. I'm going to need some time, I said. I know. To think about whether being manipulated into meeting someone is a story I can tell in a way that doesn't make me sound like I had no agency. You had agency, he said immediately. You set the terms. You pushed back in the meeting. You told me about Eleanor Marsh and I listened, and I actually thought about it afterward, about what she built in her retirement because she cared enough to keep going. That was you. Your values. I didn't manufacture any of that. The car stopped in front of my building. I looked at him. He looked back. The ring's in my coat pocket, I said. The placeholder one. Do you want it back? Something flickered across his face. No. Okay. I reached for the door handle. Paused. Whit. It was the first time I'd used his name. I watched him register it. Call me, I said. The right way this time. No middlemen. I got out of the car. The night air was cold and clear and smelled like October, and I did not look back, which cost me something. But some costs are worth it, if only to know you're capable of paying them. He called the next morning at 7:42. I was still in my scrubs, coming off a night shift, standing in the parking garage again with my keys in my hand. I picked up. Good morning, he said. You're early. You told me to call, I called. I leaned against my car. Above the concrete ceiling somewhere, the sun was doing what it did every morning without anyone's permission. There are rules, I said. If we're doing this the right way, tell me the rules. No more using Kevin as a relay. No more arrangements. You want something, you ask me directly. Agreed, and you have to be honest with me when I push back. Even when it's inconvenient. I've never found it inconvenient. I find it, he paused, clarifying. I smiled before I could stop myself. Fine, then we'll see. "We'll see," he repeated, and there was something in his voice, quiet and settled, like a man who had been waiting a long time and had finally stopped counting. I got in my car. I drove home in the pale October morning, the city waking up around me, the gold band still in my coat pocket, and for the first time in 5 weeks I didn't think of it as someone else's idea of a solution. I thought of it as mine.